where you think we are right now in terms of what sort of increase we'll see over the next year. Go ahead, Shelby.
Hi, I'm Shelby Saville. I'm head of investment for Foundry, one of the Publicis media agencies. As you saw from the forecast from our holding company, Zenith, we're looking at just over 4%, and a lot of that is that it's an Olympic year. We have the election. I think that's going to boost ad spend. I will say, though, that there's a general feeling of uncertainty and needing fluidity and options and all of that, because there's a lot of uncertainty of what's going to happen with the economy, what's going to happen throughout the election. So even though we are looking at an ad spend that will be up, the one thing that I want to say is, from talking to many clients, the uncertainty of where their ad spend is going to fall and when they're going to actually release those dollars is still in play, and definitely looking at all of those factors of where they're going to end up at the end of the year.
And we should say Dentsu has the most conservative, of all of the holding companies, Dentsu has the most conservative forecast that we've seen.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Stimmel. I'm Chief Investment Officer at UM. I agree, so we can start off with an agreement. We're seeing a lot of the cyclical driving, but also the growth around globally. Somewhat surprising, particularly with the uncertainty that exists. I think what the planned spend versus what actual spend varies by point in time when we look at an overall aggregate of what the overall marketing spend from our clients is. And I think a lot of it has to do with where we continue to drive the most flexibility, which is on the spends themselves. So when we go into the year, our whole purpose is obviously we want to drive effectiveness and efficiency in whatever we do, but building the flexibility into the media spending is the most critical factor of what we report back to clients. But ultimately, we even sometimes surprise ourselves, our clients included, to see where we end up. And I think a lot of it, at least in the US, has been fueled by favorable tax policies, particularly with this administration. So I think we've seen a lot of that come back into marketing so they can spur that to grow, as well as the new direct-to-consumer and the local and regional businesses that have just shown dramatic ability to advertise not only through social media, but also through national media and TV as well.
I want to come back to that point of flexibility in a second and how you guys are building it in. Matt?
My name is Matt Sweeney. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for GroupM. We sort of all agree. I'd like to not agree with you guys, but we see the same thing. You know, clients want flexibility. Overall, we see global ad spending slowing over the next few years. U.S. growth being strong this year, supported obviously by Olympics and political spending. I think we're a little bit more bullish than some of the other agency holding companies. We knew Mike Bloomberg was going to get into the race, maybe, and you guys didn't. So overall, yeah. It is going to be a challenging year for our marketing partners, not just around budgets, but finding quality supply, especially across video. And that's becoming an increasingly important issue for our marketing partners as ratings continue to decline, prices go up, demographics get older and older. We need to find quality like-for-like inventory in other places.
Kathy?
Okay, it's on. Hi, I'm Catherine Warburton, and I am Chief Investment Officer at Assembly. And full disclosure, Mike Bloomberg is my client. I do agree in terms of the estimates moving forward, but I think that years ago when we looked at these estimates, it was either a rising tide of the economy and all boats were rising. Now we see a lot of categories under duress. Traditional categories that spent lots of money in traditional linear outlets like QSRs, casual dining, retailers, movies. We see the upswing of the direct-to-consumer advertisers. And the world is a lot more complicated than it was in the past. That search for quality video, as I'm sorry, I forget your first name, Matt was talking about. I think that as the ratings decline, our clients are really looking for quality video beyond the linear screen, and that has become challenging at scale.
Catherine, if Bloomberg is your client, I guess lunch is on you today. Let's pick up on John, your point about flexibility. And are all of you agreed that flexibility needs to be baked in this year? And I'm curious about how you're doing it. How that's actually impacting in terms of contracts, your approach to the upfronts, how you actually plan for and build in flexibility.
Well, with the upfront, we look at it not just in the silo. We want to look at total video, but also total marketing spend. And based off of growth of digital viewing or streaming versus linear, we want to drive that consistency in how we're spending. But more importantly, the way that we do deals, the fact that we actually spend significantly more as an agency in a calendar year period of time than a broadcast year applies flexibility, and then we build that in and anticipate through the deals that we create through Magna the flexibility of the growth and the incentives to spend versus hard commitments that we then have to achieve throughout the year and find those dollars, but that just doesn't work for us and doesn't work for our clients. So I think that idea of buying the base of the places that we know we're going to spend where the majority of scale and reach exists, and then building in the audience-based buying approach that we can do in a quarter, monthly, weekly periods of time allows us the flexibility to look at total budgets and manage it and make those shifts, whether they're within media or out of media altogether. But most of the time, we've seen that money stick around, so we've been having a pretty accurate year of the way that we've been spending in terms of what we anticipated.
Anybody else want to talk about flexibility, how you're baking in flexibility?
Yeah, we've got a broad range of clients in our portfolio in a bunch of different categories. Some of the challenged categories you mentioned, low growth, low margin businesses, and then we have a lot of clients in high growth, high margin business. So we try to manage the portfolio that way. And if someone's looking to get out of a deal, we more likely than not have money that we can replace it with.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, all clients want flexibility. However, they keep coming to this upfront market year after year, doing the negotiations almost the same way they were doing it 20 years ago. So a lot of clients still see value in their low bases that they have in the upfront. And I personally believe that that really is what fuels the upfront, that security of the low base pricing. And as the duress on the supply continues, we are going to see, I think, high increases in this year's upfront. And it's nice to talk about flexibility, but I predict we'll have lots of the same negotiations that we had a year ago.
Since you brought us to the upfronts, let's stick with that, about what you're anticipating, all of you are anticipating from the upfronts this year.
Similar to last year, I think we're going to have a very strong upfront for all the reasons that you said. Because the supply is dwindling, there's definitely the fear of supply and demand, and we have to get in there and we have to secure the bases. We have to secure the inventory that we need overall. That said, I think we have been pushing very hard over a number of years of redefining what the upfront pieces are. So that includes audience buying, that includes digital video, that includes multi-screen. That includes everything so that we can start to release the pressure on the supply a bit, because we're all just pounding the same dwindling supply. And there doesn't seem to be a letting up of that because everyone wants their piece. So we've been looking at what are the ways that we actually, one, do the right thing by the consumer. So we actually need to make sure that we're in all of the right places, but we also understand that this is a finite and shrinking space as it relates to traditional television, but that doesn't mean video itself is dwindling. It's really just that marketplace and that delivery mechanism. So how do we expand upon that? And that also does increase some level of flexibility, some level of being able to move things around. But I don't foresee, I foresee us still having a pretty strong upfront spend because I haven't seen clients pulling back dramatically from that.
So once again, I think, and Shelby had mentioned as well, the upfront is really more than TV, right? So we are not just with the media partners that are TV media owners, but in collective of all the partners that we look at that we think are important to our business, driving the best price at a period of time that we know that clients will want to spend. I think the piece that we continue to focus on is not how much, but what is the appropriate spend for the amount of people that actually consume television? Because that group of audience, even though you haven't seen a lot of the overall video viewing falling off, that audience is getting older and the frequency is going up with the lower ratings, and you're losing reach, right? So what we've been looking at is, okay, if we're looking at diminishing returns or whatever we feel that metric should be for our clients, let's spend appropriately based off what we anticipate ratings will be as the year goes on, and not look at the point in time that we're sitting in expecting another double-digit decline, because clients don't have unlimited creative, and that creative tends to work against you when you're wearing it out over a long period of time. So I think that's where I get somewhat frustrated with the upfront. I get what it is. I mean, there's a lot of things I get frustrated about. But I think the idea of us coming together to plan and take a look holistically at what the market looks like and make some either bets or strategies about how we're going to manage it, I think is critical. How we structure the deals are critical. How we drive the video portion of the media owner's portfolio to better terms and conditions is critical. The TV piece tends to be fairly transactional at this point, that I just feel we need to make sure that we're looking holistically against audiences and frequency and reach against those audiences and only buy what we need.
Well, let's tie this to Matt's point about hunting for quality video now, because I think you're all suggesting that's one of the key challenges. Where are you finding that quality video? Where are you finding those equivalent audiences in digital channels where it's actually working?
Well, I want to make sure we delineate between quality video and brand safe video, because I think sometimes people turn lower produced video into non-brand safe, which is not true. Part of it is defining what is quality to your consumer, because something that is, premium or prime is quality because of how it's produced and how it's distributed, but to your consumer, quality could mean many, many things, and what they're connected to means many, many things. So we have gone out across all video channels to look at what is quality in terms of it's brand safe, it's distributed correctly by just meaning in real ways versus, paid to be distributed and all of that. And we're finding that there's actually quite a lot of supply in that. But you have to do the work to figure out where it is, and it's super fragmented. So that's part of the problem, is doing buys against an audience across all of that video to make sure that those pieces are in place, like brand safety, targeting, all of that gets to be difficult. But I think finding the quality digital video isn't the problem. I think aggregating it successfully is difficult. I think also finding it delivered on the TV screen versus the mobile screen. Sometimes if you want to look at it screen-based, looking at TV screen delivered digital video can be tough, and the fragmentation in that across all the apps that exist out there is incredibly difficult. So we're not finding that there's a supply issue in that once you expand past the network videos per se. But what we're finding is the fragmentation makes it very difficult to aggregate reach and very difficult to get to an audience in a way that's going to get you the same like-for-like reach levels and frequency that you can see through television.
How are you guys solving for this? Matt, you had mentioned that it's a key challenge.
Yeah, we're doing the same. We're analyzing the marketplace, looking for quality brand safe video. I come from the programmatic world. There are a lot of similarities between what happened 6 or 7 years ago in programmatic to what we're seeing now with addressable and connected TV in terms of data sets, platforms where you can activate, how you can measure, better proxies for success and better KPIs. But one of the things I'm doing, I've got two young boys, and at Christmas time, they had to create a list for Santa. And my wife and I looked at this list, and I did not recognize one toy that they described. And the reality was they've been watching a lot of Netflix and Disney Plus when it launched, a lot of YouTube. They weren't seeing TV ads. When I was a kid, all I saw were TV ads around Christmas time of all the stuff that I wanted. Literally had to go to Target and take pictures after the boys pointed out what they wanted and said we were going to send that to Santa. So you've got to look at sort of how younger digital natives are connecting with content, and then try to figure out how you then leverage those connections and make sure that you're finding quality, brand safe inventory that people are watching. The consumers have moved off of, especially young consumers, have moved off of traditional TV. And so you're going to find them where they are.
Matt, that's so true, because imagine when you ask like your boys, what are your favorite shows? The things they're going to talk about are not things any of us have ever watched.
They ask me what did I watch as a kid, and I go and show them Looney Tunes and the Three Stooges and stuff like that, and these are things that they're just not familiar with.
I think that the challenge is the world has changed, so not everything, but almost everything is addressable. So you don't have these huge tentpole events, very few of them, that mass reach no matter what the target is gathered around. So like we were talking the other day, actually I was talking with A&E about this. The Grammy Awards was down, right? So the Grammy Awards was down 5%. I don't think anyone's surprised that ratings are down, right? And 5%, when you think of it, is really not that bad in this world, but the relevance of something like a Grammy Awards or Academy Awards has changed because the people who are looking at this type of content, whether it's movies or listening to music, is also fragmented, that it's hard to have this one rallying point of, let's watch this, and this is what everybody's excited about.
But let's name some names. Some of the channels, especially when it comes to video, alternative to TV, where you actually are finding that you're getting what you're looking for in terms of either brand safety, quality video, or unduplicated reach. What are some of the places, especially in the last couple of years, where you've started moving money, where you're actually starting to see this? I mean, when I go onto YouTube, Catherine, I don't know if this is the part of the account that you have, I cannot watch a clip anymore without a Bloomberg ad. Clearly somebody there thinks this is really, really valuable.
So that is not my part. That is the campaign does that themselves. And you obviously are a prime target for Bloomberg, I guess. It's all about addressable.
A disenchanted leftist looking for an alternative. Yes, that's me. I'm sorry, go ahead, Shelby.
I was just going to say, this is one of the places where addressable becomes largely at play because of the need to aggregate. I'm going to talk CTV for a second. The need to aggregate across a number of apps. And so when you think about all of the TV apps that are out there, all of the video that's being delivered into the home via the TV through digital, we're using a lot of addressable to be able to get to that at scale. So you have addressable companies like Xandr, for example, that have combined a lot of different CTV inventory that allow us to be addressable. We at Publicis have also done a lot of work to bring together a lot of different apps that we've looked at that are brand safe. The video that's coming is professionally produced or produced well through a user, and we're able to then aggregate scale against an audience. So I think we're less going out to individual pieces and trying to aggregate that and more of looking at it on an audience level. Outside of that, we also do incorporate in our upfront deals all of that as it relates to digital video, whether it's delivered social, mobile, on the connected TV, and anywhere. We also do that throughout the upfront deals as well.
So we've, I guess, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years now, we've been going big into Hulu, obviously, because it was an easy extension that we all knew of the content and it was safe, and dated for a few years before we got married, then became a client. And then we worked with Roku. We started doing deals with over the past few years because obviously OTT was growing. We knew that was at least a scalable environment. We could start to understand that viewership, and that has scaled quickly across our portfolio. Obviously worked with other companies that have provided like Crackle, things like we did a Google Preferred deal a few years ago when the shift that was meaningful, and we were not seeing the reach on the lower sides of our audiences and buying targets, and that was something that obviously we felt was the more premium safe area within Google that we could probably migrate a lot of those spends. So we've made those determinations based off of obviously scale, relevancy, and well as quality. And to Shelby's point, that quality metric varies by individual, right? So Twitch is another place that we've spent a lot with specific clients. Like that's places where young people are spending a lot of time that to them is a quality destination that they want to watch, whether it's a live streamer or it's UGC or whatever it might be. It has determined itself to be the place that people go. And as advertisers, we see our clients, they want to go where the people are.
One thing we're watching, just speaking of Twitch, we're watching really closely is when you look at Twitch, and then ESPN just announced a lot of live digital programming. We're watching the live digital programming, because between Twitch and then ESPN also with their announcement and many others, the live digital programming, I think, is a new area that has not been explored. But you look at a younger consumer, they're very used to tapping into something live. They want to interact. They want to be part of that. And so I think the idea that there's live programming and digital that will be at scale soon is super interesting.
Yeah, we now all have, the phone in our pocket is now acting almost like a reverse remote control. The shows are now turning us on and telling us, hey, we've gone live. And that's a tremendous pull. This gaming piece is really interesting to me. Catherine, Matt, are you looking into the gaming channel? Because I think it's still relatively undiscovered country in the sense that there's massive scale and engagement, but we're still waiting for advertisers really to catch up with it.
Well, definitely for the younger audiences, absolutely. We have the Truth Campaign, which is the anti-smoking campaign, and they've been involved in that for a number of years at this point. But I think that any advertiser that's targeting 18 to 24, if they're not buying that stuff, they're missing a big audience. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Twitch is interesting. Really like what Simulmedia is putting together as well. There is a lot of scale there, a lot of data. So those are partners we're looking at right now, as well as the folks that have been mentioned, the Xanders and Ampersands of the world.
Although traditionally gaming content as an environment for advertising has always been iffy because of the nature of the nature of the engagement is often very different. I'm curious if any of you are seeing that people, when they're really engaged in gaming content, even if they're passively viewing it, they don't want to be interrupted. And I'm curious if any of you are seeing metrics coming back from maybe from the anti-smoking campaign anywhere that suggests that this is a different kind of channel, or if it really is a traditional media channel that actually works the same way.
Well, I think we've approached it not as traditional as much as like trying to, first of all, we have clients who are aligning themselves with esports and leagues themselves. So that kind of opened up the door to larger spends within these environments. But we've been focused a lot on the actual streamers themselves. So having a relationship with them and making sure it's obviously a natural relationship and something that isn't particularly just a paycheck being handed over. Like those are the ones that have been most meaningful to us and our clients. And I think, outside of, we've seen a lot of influencer sides that have actually been kind of gross, like, a lot of NASCAR-like situations where they're just, it becomes a commodity, and that's not where our brands want to be. But the people on the streaming side actually have built a fan base and see the value in those relationships and use that relationship with their core audiences to actually grow this brand with people that haven't seen it, because they obviously don't consume traditional channels where they exist. Yeah.
I think that's key. A strategy around gaming is important, because gaming interruption, so interrupting gaming like you would a television show or a video, it's not going to be a good consumer experience, and you're going to get backlash on that. So it is how are you relating to the gaming? How are you part of esports? How are you part of, for example, Twitch's live video programming around gaming versus interrupting an in-game experience? I think that we have to tread very lightly on just because you can put an ad somewhere doesn't mean that you should, and that's the actual way to get into that space.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, overall, I think the migration of younger consumers to some of the streaming services, both the AVOD and SVOD services, much of that's been driven by over-commercialization. We've seen too many lousy ads and repetitive ads for years and years and years, and we've sort of driven consumers to not engage with advertising anymore. So some of the announcements recently from NBC and some of the AVOD subscription services, you're going to hear about lighter ad loads, more engaging, creative, and integrated content opportunities. And I think that's an exciting place to start looking to place some money, and we're doing that aggressively.
Well, it's great to hear that actually the major buyers are starting to take gaming seriously. I covered it for years. I would argue that gaming was probably the only digital media format the only media format that digital actually invented, and it's I think it's massively important. But finding the way in is really going to be challenging. Let me ask about the other elephant in the room this year, which is politics. and political media spending and how you see it impacting what you do. We're going to see a massive amount of money come in. We're going to see a massive amount of spot inventory, especially bought up. How are you anticipating, what are you anticipating, and how do you see it's going to impact your planning?
So prior to late November, I was always on the other side of the political business. I was worried about my spots getting blown out in the local market. What's my strategies in order to avoid that? I knew a little bit about the political way of purchasing media, but now I know a lot. And it's a very, especially in the local marketplace, it doesn't affect the national marketplace as much, but in the local marketplace, it is totally disruptive to the regular advertiser. The lowest unit rate period is 45 days prior to the primary. And as we are in those Super Tuesday states, the demand on your local inventory is going to go through the roof. It's going to be hard for local advertisers to clear their advertising. Now, granted, these political advertisers concentrate in the news areas. So it definitely is going to affect the local marketplaces. And if it touches the national marketplace, it's small. It's not as disruptive. So it's really a local versus national situation.
Yeah, it's a local market issue unless there's a big event like the Super Bowl and you've got some of the campaigns running national ads. And then the question becomes, well, do any of your advertisers who've invested quite a bit of money want to be anywhere near those messages? And the answer to that is no. They don't want to be anywhere near potentially a candidate that's seen as polarizing. And all candidates are polarizing to somebody, so we want to stay away from that stuff on a national basis whenever we can. But I agree, it's all about local, and rates in Iowa have gone up, and here comes Florida and Arizona.
How are you going to handle how will the local markets adapt and handle this if you're trying to break through in this coming year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're watching it aggressively around spots being blown out and not being able to deliver the schedule. I think everyone forgets there's also the solve through programmatic geo-targeted videos, so you can get to local in other ways of video, and that's what we've had to look a lot at to make sure that in those key markets where we think we're going to have a challenge, are we able to put our local dollars down in a different way and buy them through whole different channels in order to make sure that we are actually getting the local presence that we need and somewhat stepping back from the local TV environment and more going to geo-targeted, geo-fence local activity. Even though there's going to be competition in that as well, there's just a lot more supply, so we have a little less of an issue getting things blown out and not running. So that's just one tactical thing we've been looking at a lot.
So obviously, we could anticipate the battleground states, cities, that these things will happen, and we inform clients of those things, but the necessity to be in those places can be tackled through geo-targeting. But we've also seen, and this has been more of the bleed, and we don't, obviously the general election, we could see more of national advertising than we're seeing currently. But I think the local advertisers or regional advertisers that typically just went through the local markets that they would cover are seeing that tipping point where that maybe the national is a better opportunity for them. Mm-hmm. So that kind of bleed from the local to the national, we have seen with some clients in terms of the interest of, should I do cable up front? Should I buy differently? Or can you do something more regional that would maybe make sure that I can have the campaign that I have? So I think that those planning conversations are happening now, and we've been anticipating, at least as we get to the general election, that things might bleed more into the national conversation.
Let's talk a little bit about clients and client sentiment for the coming year, both in terms of how they're seeing, how they're looking at their media strategy over the next year, what you're hearing from them. And I think all of you have already said you've got quite a range of clients with a lot of different needs. There's a lot of diversity there. But also, I'm curious how they're viewing a coming year of tremendous partisanship and volatility in terms of what they're sensitive about and how they're being placed and where they're being placed into the media space. Tell us a little bit about generally the attitude of clients about the media world in the coming year, but also in particular if you're having discussions with them about the sort of very partisan and volatile environment that we're about to enter into culturally. We're already in. Anybody?
Stay away is what they...
Well, but you can't. I mean, they can't, right?
No, that is interesting, though. We do have a lot of clients who just opt out or try to opt out as much as possible to say, I just can't go in there because we have clients one of two ways, which is I need to opt out completely because the moment I get anywhere near seeming as if I'm part of this, it's never good for the business. And then we have clients that seem to not be overly concerned because they do have a partisan one way or the other. But I would say, I think, honestly, your answer was great because that's exactly what I was thinking.
Opt out of what in particular? Well,
Things
opt out of what in particular?
No, I mean... Well,
where are they being sensitive? I mean, where are they showing their sensitivity?
News. I think, look, the brand guys want to sort of stay away. The DR folks in our portfolio will spend there if they get a return. So that's kind of what's been going on, at least, in our shop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think staying away from opinion, I think, has been blanket statement. We don't want to be in necessarily the opinion programming, but it's interesting because we're finally seeing some supply in an area, right? But there's not demand, right? Because people are being sensitive to the topics, and we do have clients who do buy news, and they're not going to buy just one, right? They got to buy collectively because they can't skew any allegiance to a particular side. So it's a very delicate situation, and then when you get into digital media, like it's almost blocked entirely because you just don't even know, not even the content of the story, but the context matters, right? So there could be a subject of opioid use that a pharmaceutical might not want to be next to. That's a perfectly fine story. So those are the kind of filtering and understanding we need to have. So sometimes, and we obviously can do what we can to make that happen with the technology we have, but in some cases it's, clients say, I'd prefer not to do any of it.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, we were talking.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about this, and
Yeah, so I have a lot of clients that target older audiences, pharmaceuticals and some other clients, and those clients are heavy news purchasers. They have avoided opinion programs. So, John, to your point, the opinion programs. They will avoid those programs, but otherwise they support the news. They support all of the news networks, evening news, the local markets. They all support the local news. So in a television environment, they're supporting all of that. But to John's point, and Steve, you brought this up this morning, these blacklists that our clients have when they go into the programmatic space, they're very large blacklists to make sure that they're never in an area that could be controversial in any way. And I could see how that could really negatively affect the seller's ability to monetize their inventory. It could be great inventory.
Just on the programmatic side, we had, whitelists and blacklists that still do, and you still find scale. We had, 850 something sites on a whitelist, and you had no problem scaling. It's a lot different, obviously, if you're trying to stay away from opinion and news and traditional TV. You just don't have as much supply, even though ratings seem to be up.
Could both of you talk a little bit more about your blacklists? What is off the table, especially on the digital side? Because now we're in a whole different realm, especially with Facebook, the unreliability of content on Facebook. It's public profile, which has become increasingly controversial. So I'm curious about how this impacts what your blacklists look like, what it captures, what it doesn't capture, and how you're making those decisions.
Yep. Our blacklists are really around things such as opinion news, things that are not verified content, where we understand where it was generated from. There's a lot of misinformation, especially through social. You started at the beginning of your your remarks around the amount of misinformation in the health category. So back to pharma, that's a huge piece of making sure all of that is blacklisted, so we're not around, XYZ site that just created an article with no backing and no facts and nothing. And a lot of it also, again, is about, dark inventory that can be served up in programmatic that we obviously want to shut down the ability to run on anything where we don't understand and verify where it's coming from. Outside of that, it's opinion news, it's levels of information that may be, unsavory. So, news around terrible topics, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily blacklisted in programmatic as much as we manage that through a content provider. But in general, it's anything that's going to be either deemed brand safe or a brand just isn't going to feel good to support that. So
there's the blacklisting, and there's obviously, and I mentioned the contextual piece of it as well that will vary by client. But schools, like anything related to schools, the breaking news is the thing that's been kind of the most difficult to manage because you just don't know what it is. And as an industry, I think we've done a good job of coming together with the Advertiser Protection Bureau, which Joshua Lowcock, our Chief Digital Officer, has helped to create by notifying each other, regardless of the advertiser, of when things occur, right? So, because we want everyone to be lifted up and have no clients be subject to misfired digital impressions in the places that they just want, because any impression can cause more damage than an impression because it can be picked up by media outlets who enjoy the fact of exposing the safety issues with the places in digital media where they may not be benefiting from. So I think the vigilance there has been great, and when we get those reports, our blacklists, whitelists are adjusted in almost real time to minimize that presence. And we might not even have an advertiser, or maybe our advertiser is helping another agency. I think those things like that are things that we don't celebrate enough.
Now, the news media argue, well, you're choking the funding for the most verifiable content on the web in doing this. What is the obligation of the advertising community to support quality journalism, verifiable journalism, the best content that there is, simply because it has to, out of necessity, engage touchy topics? Because the argument coming back, and there's been, and some recent research has been published about the fact that, in fact, brands really don't suffer when they're adjacent to this kind of content. There's nothing to show that they really do. But their argument is you're cutting off the funding for the best content that digital has to offer.
right. I mean, we've been looking at how do you look the difference between verified news, hard news, breaking news, quality journalism, and opinion news. I think to some degree I go back to the providers and the networks to say, when you allowed yourself to become associated with opinion news, that's not news, that's somebody taking the news and having an opinion about it, was when it became very difficult for our brands to be part of that as a whole, not even just being in opinion news, but being a supporter of a network or provider that has opinion news, because of the fact that there is often a backlash. And so what ended up happening is that people said, I'm going to opt out completely of news. Now, what we have done is we've gone to our clients and said, listen, it's not about opting out of news. What you don't want to be part of and associated with is opinion news, or if you do, you need to be in all of the opinion news. But you can delineate that, and it is important to support with ad dollars quality journalism. But I would also say to many of the providers out there, can you please be quality journalism and stick to facts and reporting news versus skewing very heavily to personalities and opinions and all of that, that just has a halo across all news at this point in time.
I can understand that position, but I would argue that what's choking them is the misinformation and the bad news outlets that are screaming louder than them, and unfortunately, that has what's resonated. We are still supporting New York Times and Wall Street Journal and all the quality news journalists that exist. It just requires us to be more careful about where we do that. And the subject matter, because we're in this period of time that's very divisive with sensitive topics, it just has created a different environment for the way that marketers think about their products. And the last point I'll make is it actually proves the efficacy of digital media if we're actually concerned about where our ads run in relation to the content, right? So I think that that's a good thing, but at the same time, we also have to be careful about how it's exposed and how it gets picked up, because it's the news media that also reports on the ads next to the story about something awful, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an unfortunate cycle of things occurring that in the end, the brands will lose, and it just takes one, right? So I think we can't underestimate that importance. I mean, jobs get lost over it. So I think and I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about marketers, right? We just have to be careful about, like how it is deemed about the marketer's role in the success or lack of success of news journalists. There still is a demand and need. We just wish as a country we could differentiate between the two.
I want to go to questions in a second. Before I do my wrap question is, what is the biggest known unknown in the coming year in terms of what's the standout variable that could really change your plans most dramatically in the next year?
I'll throw one out there. And I might be aggressive by saying next year, but I think measurement. I think we continue to look at, and I know the MRC and the proposals there, the data capture of audiences and environments that we all want to buy seemingly could be unreported, right? And there's data capture in other places that are being misrepresented. So the capture of fraud or making sure that it's valid traffic and then the weeding out the undesirables from being in business anymore. We want to make sure that the places that we are spending are accountable. And are we accounting for it based on results and not a proxy for results or a mishmash of things that we use to think that this will be similar to this channel or this medium, so we're going to use that concentration against this delivery of streams or whatever. It's ridiculous at this point.
Is the MRC's are the MRC guidelines moving in the right direction? Is this something that's going to impact the way you're allocating?
Any more granular reporting on accuracy, and I think duration weighting, I think it does matter. I know there's debate about that. Anything that does that is a good thing for everybody. The more accountability we can put in everything that we do and directly attribute the decisions we make to the outcome that we get, I think is positive.
So, John, I agree. I'm a big supporter in independent third-party measurement, but I think that our focus at Assembly since its inception 5 years ago is about driving performance and value for our clients, and we do that through our analytics teams. So the third-party measurement is one aspect of what we're tracking, but real sales results, things that are moving our clients' KPIs are the guiding force. And what I do love about what's happening in the marketplace today is more video is available, addressable, whether it's on a digital platform or digitally served through OTT. I think that's really exciting, and I see my clients already taking advantage of that, and I think that will grow. There is the aspect of the complication of the supply chain there. It's not as simple as television, which a lot of clients are trying to wrap their heads around. But I see that things that become more addressable, that will shift the way we plan.
Yeah, I would agree. It's again, programmatic 6 or 7 years ago. It's fragmented. It's too complex. It costs too much to transact. I think the industry has put us into a situation where you become a little cynical and jaded, and every data tech media company in the world, or a combination of the three, come in and pitch us and our teams. And what happens over time is you've got to have the people who have experience around data and analytics understanding how clients can leverage first-party data and integrate that data into platforms that can then be activated. That's really where we're focused, is finding as many of those people as possible that got that kind of experience working on our team, so that they can appropriately question some of the data tech media vendors in the space. So it is around measurement, it's around credibility, it's about finding the right dozen partners to help move a lot of our spend into some of these platform-based buying. So.
Yeah, one of the fastest growing groups within Spark is data architecture, because it's all around that. And it's connected to analytics, but it's really about how do you architect the data that you're going to need, and mostly around first party because of all the data regulations and needing to understand where the data is coming from, how you're using it, how you're actually communicating to consumers about what they're opting into. That's one of the fastest growing areas because there's such a need to get that data in the right place so that you can leverage it, so you can bring it to market and therefore see whether or not it works. And I think that that's continuing to be a big area that we're growing in because it's a necessity to do the things we're going to need to do as everything moves very digitally and very fragmented.
Interesting, you all grouped together to answer that question by talking about the infrastructure, and that's what is going to influence your decisions, not necessarily external events.
Well, the opportunity to reach people individually at larger scale in video beyond other outlets and taking your in-house analytics and seeing what exactly is that doing for your business. Obviously, we're still buying linear channels as well, but I think that that is a theme that all of us have been working towards, right, for years at this point.
But yeah, external factors, I mean, GDP growth, trade wars, personal consumption, elections, all those things obviously weigh into the analysis we do and trying to help guide our clients through a turbulent marketplace.
Let's open it up to a question. Any of you have questions, raise your hand. And over here. Hang on, we got a microphone to you. And tell us who you are and who you're with.
Sure, my name's Christian. I'm from Bliss, we're one of the sponsors. I had a question about data accountability. So you mentioned that a big thing for next year is around measurement and accountability. Obviously in digital, there's lots of things you can do with ad serving, viewability, fraud. What's on the horizon for making sure the data that you're investing in is the quality that it claims to be?
Well, that's why our data architecture team is the fastest growing, is that there is such a need to scrub every ounce of data we're ever going to use. I will be honest, we're working with a lot of clients on how they harness and grow their first-party data because they have the most control and the most knowledge of that. And then if we're going out to any type of second or third-party data, we have to have real controls around where that's coming from, who's the source of the data ownership versus aggregators, where the data has changed hands multiple times. That in the world of having a lot of data requirements either here or coming, depending on if you're operating in the US, outside of the US, it becomes critical to understand all of the ways that the data was gathered, how it's used, how it's cleaned, who owns it, where it came from. To that point, our clients who have an infrastructure to gather first-party data are leaning in and doubling down on that because of the control of that in places and categories where that just cannot scale, because that is a true piece. It becomes around rigorous look at partners and a very reticent view to go and bring new partners to the fold, and especially anyone who's aggregating multiple sources of data. We really want to get to the ownership level of who owns the data and going directly to those partners because they have a better understanding and clarity around where that came from. And I think it's really about how do you get to data that is already clean and ready to go and verified and everything like that. Like it's just a huge part of what we do now.
How are and let me ask this of all of you, and you can also answer that, the original question. How are the CCPA and recent changes to the browser mechanics going to influence, say, in particular, the reliability of third-party data?
So I think first and foremost, we've fortunately built an infrastructure with Axiom to act as a safe harbor for a spine that we know that all the data we provide will be safe in both the GDPR and CCPA environment. I think the places that and then we have Kinesso, which kind of broke off to have consistency in its application to media based on technology and platforms. The place that we've continued to get hung up is navigating the growing number of walled gardens, right? It's not a Google, Facebook issue, it's everybody. that are building their own infrastructure for, I understand the reasons, and being able to understand where that data is sourced, right? So I will tell you, there are so many meetings we have, sales meetings, that everything is going right, and we get to the point like, or tell me where your data is sourced, and they can't answer that question. To me, that's the most critical thing, especially now. So understanding its source, its security, the ethical ways that you're managing or collecting it. Is it an opt-in? Is there some value being exchange happening with the consumer? That is going to become more and more critical as we go through the year, particularly if we get to a point where someone's going to be, regulation is going to actually find some issues with either a media partner or an advertiser.
And I feel like it's not an option to have that conversation anymore.
Yeah.
So the fact that people can't tell us or won't tell us what they're doing with that data or how it was sourced, it's just not an option to not have that conversation.
Or it's still an algorithm or a black box that we can't expose. That transparency is critical.
Yeah, again, my experience at Xaxis was unfortunately made me a little cynical and jaded about data companies. And again, not saying that they're all bad, but very few of them had anything that was unique and advantaged and priced accordingly. So, who's got a direct-to-consumer relationship? And what does that data set look like? And again, what was the value exchange? And then maybe how do we sort of leverage that data and connect it to some of our client first-party data? Those are the things we're looking at. And we're going to continue investing in AI and machine learning, which we've done at Xaxis. We're now bringing to the broader GroupM. And that is less reliant on third-party data and cookies to better predict which audiences against which inventory will drive better KPIs for our clients.
Yeah, I think that some of our clients were already very conservative in the financial industry and the pharmaceutical industry, so they were always very conservative. I think that our other clients are very wary of the future with third-party data. They're conservative. We are a mid-size agency. Most of our clients are not very large clients, so they are at all sorts of different levels in terms of whether they have a DMP or not, how they handle data, do they have first-party data. So I think that clients are being conservative going into this world, and some of them, we're trying to explain to them what this means to third-party data. Some of them totally get it, others, it's a new area for them to learn. And they're sort of afraid because they don't want to be sued.
But the one thing I'd add is we have groans when we talk about sequential liability when it comes to payment, right? Wait until we get to sequential liability for data liability, because I don't see how that's not coming up, and who's ultimately responsible.
Good note to end on, because our next panel is going to be talking precisely about regulation.
On that one too?
And we have a couple of lawyers on the panel too, so they'll be able to talk specifically about liability. Shelby, John, Matt, Catherine, as always, it's great to have you guys. Thanks so much.